He didn't trust her. None of them did. Because when Rowan Hale stared that Marine straight in the face and said 2 words, "Final warning," they laughed. They had no idea who she was, no idea what she'd survived. No idea that the quiet woman they boxed in just after 2,000 hours was an active-duty Navy SEAL combat specialist on recovery rotation. They went after her anyway. 10 seconds later, not a single one of them was still on their feet. So before we show you what happens when you ignore a SEAL's warning, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next time you hear someone say final warning, you'd better hope it's not her voice saying it. The gravel training yard behind the Joint Operations Integration Compound was calm that morning, broken only by the dull thud of weighted rucks hitting the ground and the sharp shout of an instructor correcting stance. It wasn't exactly a base, not Army, not Marines, not Federal Task Force, but a shared regional facility where different branches rotated personnel for hybrid combat readiness. That also meant rank blurred fast, and where authority blurred, ego filled the gap quickly. She exited the admin trailer without fanfare. No rifle, no tablet, no visible insignia, just black combat boots, khaki trousers, a faded gray tee, and mirrored lenses hiding her eyes. Short, maybe 5'5", all dense muscle and efficiency. The kind of presence that disappeared until it moved, and then became impossible to ignore. Most never noticed the tattoo on the inside of her wrist, small and colorless, a subtle shape halfway between a blade and a coiled spine. She crossed the pad in silence and knelt beside a partially dismantled grappling mannequin, tightening the torso straps while a few people watched from a distance. She didn't introduce herself. They handled that part. "Hey." A voice called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, aimed directly at her. "You here to deliver coffee? Or did you wander off, sweetheart?" The voice belonged to Mercer, civilian contractor, mid-30s, former infantry, now paid well to train tactical units overseas. Thick-necked, sunburned, loud, and not used to being overlooked. Beside him, 2 other trainees, Rivas and Cole, snickered young, pumped full of pre-workout and misplaced confidence. One of them muttered, "Pretty sure yoga class is in the other building." She didn't react. She rose slowly, checked the dummy's alignment, then turned toward them. Her stance was relaxed but precise, like someone gauging terrain, not danger. "You'll have to speak louder," Mercer grinned. "We don't read minds here." She angled her head slightly, then spoke at last. "I'm not here to fight." She said, steady, even, unchallenging. "Walk away." Now, the atmosphere shifted. A few nearby trainees froze mid-movement. Cole blinked. Rivas smirked. Mercer rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles like he was warming up for a lift, not stepping toward a cliff edge. That a threat? Mercer said, taking half a step forward, testing space, "Or you having a bad day?" She didn't repeat herself. Didn't grin. Didn't tense. She just looked at him the way you look at someone who's already chosen wrong. Behind her, one of the senior instructors had stepped out of the admin building and stopped, watching closely, but saying nothing. Not yet. Mercer laughed, loud and sure of himself, completely unaware of what he'd just volunteered for. So did Morales. Grant nudged the man beside him, smirking like the moment belonged on a comedy stage. She didn't respond. She simply turned back to the training dummy and tightened the final straps, as if the warning had never been spoken. But everyone heard it. And hours later, when med teams rushed in and someone was yelling about a crushed elbow, those words would resurface like a curse fulfilled. "I'm not here to fight anyone. Walk away now." They didn't. The observation deck roared. Boots pounding steel, instructors shouting corrections, laughter ricocheting off the railings. But inside the combat pit, everything went still. Rowan Pierce stood exactly where she'd been placed, right side of the raked sand, 2 meters from the blue tarp marking her unit's gear zone. She hadn't reached for her helmet. She hadn't even looked at the padded batons laid out behind her like artifacts on display. She just stood there, arms loose at her sides, gaze fixed and calm, like someone waiting out an approaching storm. Across from her, 3 male Marines were already in motion, circling with puffed chests and lifted chins. One slapped the grip of his training baton against his palm, impatient, like he was daring someone to give him an excuse. The whistle hadn't sounded yet, but none of them seemed concerned. "This one's a reserve tech," one of them scoffed, eyes dragging over Rowan dismissively. "Not even cleared for full contact. Relax, I'll keep it gentle." Another laughed. The third said nothing, only rolled his neck until it cracked. Up in the control booth, one observing instructor leaned toward another and muttered, far too loudly, "What's her story? She hasn't even shifted." "Former Army," came the reply, dripping with disdain. "Intel side support, desk rotations, minimal field exposure. Probably thinks this is about reaction speed." The first instructor snorted. "She's not going to engage." Down in the pit, one Marine finally broke formation and stepped forward, too close. His boot crunched into the sand directly in front of hers, not touching, not yet. Rowan didn't move. He leaned in. "Relax, sweetheart. I won't say a word if you drop before the whistle." Still nothing. No blink, no tightening of her stance, just one nearly invisible motion, so subtle no one else caught it. She glanced down at his boot, then at the space between them, then lifted her eyes straight to his throat. A shift so minor it could have passed as nothing, but to the Marine standing there it felt exact, like she'd just calculated distance. He stepped back half a pace without realizing he'd done it. One of his teammates noticed. "Hey, what was that?" He hesitated. "Nothing." That was when the staff instructor finally lifted the whistle to his mouth. Lena's squad hadn't even finished strapping in, and the whispers from the observation booth kept rolling. "This will be over fast. Almost unfair." "She won't even try." The whistle cut through the air. Lena stayed still. The Marines didn't. All three surged forward together. The first Marine shot in low and hard, like he was chasing a medal instead of running a drill. He went straight for her legs, planning to scoop and dump her flat onto the rubber flooring, already picturing a startled cry or a clumsy scramble. His grin showed as he lowered his stance, arms reaching, certain of the outcome. But Lena had already moved. No one in the booth noticed, not even the trainers. The camera wasn't watching her footwork. They only saw a subtle turn, her right foot gliding just enough to tilt his momentum sideways. Then she dropped, toward him, not away. She didn't resist the takedown. She guided it. Her right arm slid beneath his outstretched elbow, not to hit, but to turn. His own force folded his balance inward. Her left shoulder sank. Weight shifted. And suddenly he was weightless. Not because she hurled him, but because she allowed his body to finish the mistake he'd already committed. He hit the mat with a dull thud of air leaving his lungs. Lena never looked back. The second Marine was already mid-swing. A padded baton sliced past her head, missing not because she was late, but because she'd stepped inside the arc before it closed. It brushed only her hair. Her hands were still empty. She hadn't grabbed a weapon. Yet in the next instant, her forearms were threaded beneath his grip, elbows pinned tight, her body forming a lever. She didn't need gear. She was borrowing his. One sharp rotation, shoulders turning like a hinge, and the baton clanged to the floor. He tried to pull free. She refused him the option. Her knee drove into his abdomen. Reflex folded him forward. Then he stopped cold, realizing her elbow sat just beneath his chin. A fraction of movement away from shutting his airway down completely, she didn't follow through. She let him go. He dropped to one knee, gasping, stunned, like a line of code in his conditioning had just failed. In the booth above, an instructor lurched closer to the glass. "Hold on, rewind that." The third Marine, silent until now, charged from her blind side. She wasn't even looking at him. He came in fast, reaching to seize her from behind. And that was when the room truly went quiet, because what followed didn't register as possible. Lena didn't spin. She didn't set her feet. She simply lowered herself. As his arm swept over her shoulder, she caught it, clean, precise, not a showy lock, not brute strength. Just the exact angle taught in top-tier restraint programs, the ones never written down, reserved for black site transfers and off-the-record extractions. She moved like someone trained to neutralize, not to dominate. The Marine's face hit the mat so fast his legs kicked after the impact. He didn't rise again. The entire pit went still. No bell sounded, no whistle cut the air, yet the fight was finished. Mara stepped back, quiet, breathing even, and headed toward the rim of the ring. She still hadn't picked up a baton, and she still hadn't spoken a single word. It was meant to be routine. The drill wasn't even scheduled for formal evaluation. But instructors have habits, especially when a recruit comes pre-flagged by command. Someone always runs an unofficial backup feed, which is why by 17:30 that evening, the clip had already passed through half the installation. And by 18:00, every instructor in the mess hall was staring at it on someone's phone. At first glance, it didn't seem remarkable. Mara wasn't theatrical. No haymaker punches, no aggressive posturing or showy finishes. Just precise, quiet dismantling. And that was what made the silence so heavy. No stance correction, one instructor muttered, freezing the frame. She lured him in deliberately. Another zoomed in as she redirected the 1st Marine's charge. "That's not academy-trained," he said. "That's field theater technique. Who taught her that grip?" Then someone slowed down the 3rd takedown, frame by frame. The control hold, the joint lock, the pivot. That was when interest curdled into unease. Where did she come from again? A senior evaluator asked, brow tightening. Another pulled up Mara's personnel file. Contractor, Signals Intelligence, attached to Cross-Branch Joint Task Force Operations. Deployment history classified under OGA parameters. Other government agency. The kind of designation that didn't mean civilian assistance. It meant don't dig. That was when Lieutenant Colonel Sorrell, the officer who had approved her quiet placement, heard the knock at his door. 2 instructors and the training chief stood there, silent, holding out a tablet. No explanation needed. Sorrell watched the footage once, then again. By the 3rd run, he set the tablet down. "Was this authorized?" "No, sir, not officially." He nodded, slow and measured. "Who decided to put her in the ring?" "Sergeant Dalton, sir. Said she wasn't displaying enough aggression in drills." Sorrell didn't raise his voice. He didn't reprimand them. He simply shut the door and said a single sentence that would later be quoted in the disciplinary review. "You'd better hope she doesn't file a report." But Mara didn't. She didn't demand an apology. She didn't escalate it. She didn't even respond when asked to debrief the incident. She returned to her rack, back to the nightly reports, and chose silence. And somehow that made everything worse. No one could read her. No one could tell what she was swallowing. The footage was stamped restricted, do not circulate. It didn't matter. Before the week was out, it had moved through more devices than any approved training reel in years. It wasn't the confrontation itself people fixated on. It was how she walked away afterward like it never existed. The quiet didn't settle nerves. It tightened them. Mara didn't posture, didn't protest, didn't savor it. She showed up to dawn drills as if nothing had shifted. She didn't swat down rumors or shield her name. She ran, she lifted. She logged numbers when told, and when cornered during tactical breakdowns, she answered in clipped lines, precise, clean, straight from the manual. No guessing. No color. In a culture fueled by chest thumping, that kind of restraint felt more dangerous than pride. So a choice was made. If she wouldn't speak, they'd make her respond. It began small, a manufactured scheduling error. She was logged as late for a session she attended on time. A public reprimand, then a mistake in equipment issue. Her boots swapped for a size too tight, her ruck weighed down with 10 pounds of soaked grit. She didn't react, didn't submit a correction, so they pushed harder. Instructors drew her aside for a staged after-action critique, painting her as the liability in a simulated extraction. "I don't understand what you're doing here, Hale," one staff sergeant said. "This isn't comms work anymore. This is close quarters, lives on the line." She stayed rigid, eyes fixed ahead. "Acknowledged, Sergeant. This isn't about acknowledgement," he snapped. "It's about fitting in." "Do you honestly think you fit here?" She said nothing, and that silence only sharpened the mood. They decided to corner her in front of everyone. Day 19. Open field drill. Rain slicking the ground, mud sucking at boots, heat pressing down heavy over the compound. They dropped a 30-pound steel maul into her hands and pointed at the tire wall. 300 hits, an instructor shouted. Mara didn't ask for a reason, didn't question the count. She lifted the hammer and went to work. Bare hands, no breaks. By 80, her palms burned raw. By 140, skin split. By 200, blood streaked the handle. Someone murmured over the radio asking if they should end it. The lead instructor glanced once and shrugged. She'll fail or she won't. She didn't fail. The 300th strike landed just as sunlight tore through the thinning clouds, catching the sweat on her face like fresh paint. She lowered the hammer, walked back to the line, and stood waiting. No comment, no glance, just stance and stillness. That was what changed everything. Not the feat, not the strength, but the fact that she wasn't doing it to prove anything. She wasn't performing. She was simply executing. And that unsettled them more than any display of power ever could. Because if this was her in silence, what would happen the day she chose to speak? The review wasn't planned. It wasn't routine. And it was definitely not friendly. The man who ordered it didn't do so lightly. Commander Ethan Core, Joint Branch Strategic Advisor, former DevGru operator, now tasked with supervising inter-service combat integration, arrived without notice. His helicopter set down just after dusk. No welcome, no cameras, only boots crunching on stone and eyes sweeping the compound like he already knew every flaw. Core wasn't another desk-bound officer. He'd seen combat across 2 conflicts, directed covert missions under multiple administrations, and personally authored the evaluation standards for this exact program. When he entered the debrief tent, accompanied by 2 civilian auditors, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Instructors stiffened. Trainees exchanged nervous glances. "Mira," he said flatly, offering no introduction, his gaze fixed on Rin Hale. "Step forward." She moved immediately, no pause, posture exact. "You're the only applicant here not from a combat-designated branch," he said, as if everyone else had come up through direct action units or trained for them. "Yes, sir. You're aware of the reputation intel analysts get when they try to go kinetic?" "Yes, sir." "And what's that reputation?" "That we study from afar, that we read terrain instead of surviving it." "And are they correct?" Rin didn't flinch. "No, sir." One of the civilians scribbled something down. Core turned slowly toward the instructors, his voice measured and cold. "I've reviewed footage from her endurance hammer drill. I've reviewed the tampered equipment logs. I've reviewed the fabricated absence report." A sharp breath escaped one instructor, too quiet, too late. "This isn't just a breakdown in procedure," Core continued. "It's cowardice. You couldn't defeat her through exhaustion, so you tried paperwork instead." No one spoke. Rin remained motionless. Then Core did the unexpected. He stepped toward her, stopped, and extended his hand. She took it, firm grip, no expression. "This candidate," he said to the room, "has absorbed more psychological pressure in 20 days than most of you faced in 2 full deployments. And she's still here. Still composed, still locked in." Silence followed. "She isn't fragile," he said. "She's mission-tuned, and she's staying." Then, almost casually, he added, "I suggest every instructor present rereads her file, this time without blinders on." The civilians followed him out. Lena said nothing. She simply slid back into position. But from that instant forward, the way people looked at her shifted. It had been labeled a corrective team drill. That was the official line. On paper, it was a late-night exercise meant to evaluate response speed, squad coordination, and confined space movement. Off the record, it was something else entirely. A setup. They waited until the trainers had signed off for the night, until command lights went dark, until the compound survived on moon glow and routine alone. 8 of them. Every one of the guys who'd laughed at her, questioned her, undermined her. Corporal Mercer led them, the same one who'd kicked dust onto her boots during the blackout navigation test. They intercepted her near the vehicle yard, isolated and quiet, returning from the equipment cage. No surveillance, no instructors, no witnesses, exactly how they wanted it. "Still pretending you belong here," Mercer said as he blocked her path. Lena didn't react. "You've got everyone else buying it," he continued. "Not us." The others spread out behind him, forming a tight half-ring. "What happens when a weak link thinks it's part of the chain?" One voice sneered. "It snaps under pressure," another replied. A third stepped in close, flexing his hands. "You're not planning to report this, are you?" he said. "Or crawl back to your little comms tent?" Lena's expression never changed. She didn't step away, didn't call out, didn't lift her hands. She only inhaled. Then one of them moved fast, grabbing for her shoulder to knock her sideways. That was the final error, because Lena wasn't trained to overpower. She was trained to control. Her left foot slipped back half a step, her center dropping. Her right hand snared his wrist, and with nothing but timing and leverage, she redirected his force, sending him crashing chest first into the side of a supply truck. The impact echoed. He stayed down. Another rushed from behind, but she rotated smoothly, driving an elbow into his ribs at the exact point of collapse. The sound was sharp. Mercer swore and charged, fists tight. He never made it to her. Lena dipped low, swept his leg, then rose into a palm strike so fast it stunned even the ones watching from the edge. He reeled. She seized his collar and murmured, "You think this is pressure?" Then she released him. 4 of them stood locked in place. 3 more retreated. No one advanced. No yelling, no insults, just Lena standing at the center of a shattered formation, not breathing hard, and still she hadn't spoken. Not until she turned and walked away. Behind her, one voice whispered, "What is she?" Another answered softly, "She's why this program was built in the first place." It was meant to end quietly. No accusations, no reports, just a roll call and equipment inspection before lights out. But when Captain Rowland stepped into the briefing shelter that morning, he slowed to a stop. Mara Vance was already standing at attention in the center of the room, hands straight at her sides, uniform flawless. Around her, the others lingered apart, bruised, stiff, eyes fixed anywhere but forward. Carter had his arm strapped in a sling, a fresh purple mark still swelling beneath his eye. "What happened?" Rowland asked quietly. No one answered. He turned to Carter. Carter stayed silent. "Mara," the captain said, "did something take place last night?" She didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't blink. "Yes, sir." Rowland waited. "Care to explain?" "No, sir." A pause. A soft electronic tone somewhere in the room. "You're choosing not to file a report?" She met his gaze evenly. "That won't be required." Right then, the room seemed to breathe out as if the air itself had been holding still, waiting to see whether punishment would be demanded or restraint chosen. But Mara had already decided. Not retaliation, not correction, just silence. The kind that says more than any accusation ever could. Rowland stepped forward, studying each battered trainee one by one before speaking again. "Dismissed. All of you, except Specialist Vance." They left quietly, movements careful, slower than usual. When the door finally shut, Rowland took a seat. He didn't look at her at first, then he asked, "Why didn't you push this higher?" Mara answered without hesitation. "Because they weren't the threat, sir." An eyebrow lifted. "They were the test," she said, "and I passed." A long moment followed. Then Rowland nodded, slow and deliberate. "Yes, Specialist, you did." He stood, turned fully toward her, and raised a crisp salute, not from officer to subordinate, but from one soldier to another. She returned it without a word, calm and steady. The next morning, without notice or ceremony, her name appeared on a sealed transfer roster. Destination classified. Unit name withheld. But everyone who had been in that room understood the truth. She wasn't leaving because she failed. She was leaving because she had already outgrown the program. Because whatever came next would demand someone stronger than they even knew how to prepare. What would you have done in their position? Would you have stayed quiet like Mara, or made sure every one of them paid? And if someone like her, controlled, exact, untouchable, stood across from you in training, would you even recognize who you were facing? Drop a comment and tell us your thoughts. Tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who understands the power of the quiet ones. And while our other videos are on screen, cue up the next one now.